Okay, we're back to chapter 10 on the verse section, and I've been sort of jumping around a bit. But let me just kind of frame and bring us back. Again, pages, what's the page numbers here? On the starting verses are where? Could be 8 and 9, page 8 and 9, okay. And as I was saying last week, there's no fixed way to come at it investigating and trying to explain something as rich and deep as the Avatamsaka Sutra. There's been commentaries written and commentaries on commentaries written, and there's still, and the sutra itself says it's inexhaustible, so don't even worry about it. The tack I'm taking on this is basically to repeat, the questions are being asked, why does a bodhisattva bother if one, living beings are not really permanent entities, are not really things in themselves? Secondly, language can't reach it, whatever is being described. And you have this concept of emptiness. Everything lacks an essential nature of its own, which is pointed to in transience and impermanence and so forth. So given all of that, the question was, why do bodhisattvas engage in the liberating teaching of the Dharma? And the tack I was taking was that they are awakened to and experience something beyond or obscured by us. And that what an awakened being experiences is the world as it is without attachment, without the filters, without the veil. And they say this is seen reality, or is thusness, and they use tata, which is the root of Tathagata, which is another name for the Buddha. So seeing things as they awaken to things as they really are. In this quality or this skill, because it's an acquired skill, it's innate in every living being, but not fully developed as it would be in a bodhisattva. And all of us are along a sort of continuum of working on that, assuming those of you who came here tonight to study the Dharma, listen to the Sutra, have an interest in doing this. Not everybody is interested in pursuing this, as the outside noises tell you, at least not at this point. But the central quality of a bodhisattva throughout the Avatamsaka is their practice of what's called prajnaparamita, or the most deep state of understanding of reality as things as they really are. And this arises from the training. So their training consists basically of what's called shila, or the moral training, ethical grounding, that then allows for the centering or stability factor, which is sometimes called samadhi. But it's a stability of mind and body and emotion. It's all of that together. Stability means it's aware and alert, but it's not thrown off, it's not phased, it's not thrown askew. So it's kind of like a gyroscope in a sense. It is responsive to change and adjustment, but it always stays centered. That coming from the basis of Shila. And then those two, as some of the texts say, naturally then lead to a kind of insight, or prajna or pana, if you're using Pali. So the prajnaparamita is the culmination of that training, Shila, Samadhi, and then the pana or prajna. And they cultivate this, it says here, lifetimes, over lifetimes, which sort of tells us to cool the clock and not be nervous. If your mind and heart is set on this, then staying with it eventually will lead to this. It's only to be feared that we don't keep up our commitment and practice. And that meditative insight is very interesting, because prajna, at one stage, is a kind of insight or wisdom that comes from reading these texts. It's called literary prajna. This is sometimes the first stage. However, the literary prajna came from the last stage, which is the direct embodied understanding that is not mediated by anything. So it's interesting, there's a loop here. The first is called literary prajna. The second is called a contemplative prajna that comes when one sits in or practices a stilling of the mind. So as the Chan expression has it, that the pond waters are completely tranquil and calm and everything is reflected in them like a mirror. That's contemplative seeing or insight. It comes from deactivating the conscious mind, quieting the mind. And then there's what's called direct embodied or real mark prajna, which is this that doesn't have any literary stimulation behind it, doesn't even require contemplation. It is a complete 24/7 embodied state. So those are the three. But what's interesting is the text, the literary, come from that last stage. So and the last stage, the literary stage, leads to, if you read the text, like something like the Samdi Nirmochana text, it says the literary is a very limited tool of inquiry. From the literary, you have to go to the contemplative. You have to still the mind to get insight that comes beyond words and language, or before words and language. So you can see there's a cycle here between the three prajnas, they interact. Anyhow, I'm suggesting that these verses share this awakened seeing, S-E-E-I-N-G, or what the text says, the wise ones are able to observe. What are the wise ones able to observe? And now we go into, I'm going to use these verses here. So let's start with the second verse. And then, of course, I'm jumping around, but it's 分别观内山 敌中水是我 若能如世界 彼家我有无 And that starts us. Observe the body in detail throughout. What of it is actually me? One who understands in this way comprehends there is no self to be found. So, what do they observe? What are they seeing? The first thing they're seeing is the reality or the trueness of what we call self. And they're positing there is no self to be found. Now, that doesn't mean there's no person, there's no being. That's not what it's saying. By self, they mean a permanent, stable, unchanging, substantial entity. And basically, they're saying no matter where you look in the universe, from the macro to the micro, there's no such thing. It's nowhere to be. So self is a very, it's atta or atman. It's a very precise term. We mistakenly take this to be a negation of my personhood. And that's not what it's talking about. It's a negation of a view of my personhood as being eternal, unchanging, stable, immutable, blah, blah, blah. And that, according to these teachings, is at the heart of all our confusion. So this is basically what is meant by avidya, not seeing this truth. And it's not meant to throw you into some kind of nihilistic depression. It's only meant to sort of splash cold water on a dream that we're holding to. In the 10 Transferences chapter, which eventually we'll get to down the road here, because that's chapter 10, what is 10? 20, I think. And we're on 10, miles from nowhere. Like the song goes, miles from nowhere, think I'll take my time, oh yeah, to get there. Look up at the mountain, I have to climb, oh yeah. Okay, Avatamsaka, 10 Transferences, repeats this theme. And here's a quote. Although there are no living beings which can be spoken of at all, which we could speak of, in a sense of that stable, unchanging, we merely follow worldly custom in falsely or provisionally referring to them, or in pretending to refer to them. So this is right out of the 10 Transferences, repeating this theme. I maybe said this before, there's a wonderful passage in the text where the monk Nagasena has a dialogue with the Greek king Menander, which is very interesting if you think about it. So this is an early monk who's having a conversation with a Greek king. Now, what's he doing in Greece? Or why is a Greek king interested in Buddhism? So this sort of breaks down these little narrow dichotomies we have of the Greeks did Greek and the Buddhists did Buddhist. There's lots of examples of an interchange. This is very interesting. Interchange not only between Greece and India at this time, but also between the Eastern world and the Western world. Not just along the Silk Route, which is obviously a major highway of transference. I'm digressing, but it's fun. They found these mummies in the western provinces of China. And a colleague of mine who had first view of them made some notes of them, and then quickly they were taken away and put in for safekeeping. And the reason they were put for safekeeping is because the mummies had blue eyes and red hair. Moreover, they were wearing clothes that they found in the mummies that were, like my dad's Pendleton shirt, tartan fabrics. You know what tartan means? And where did they come from? Oh, China. No, they don't. They're coming as far away as Scotland. So how do you have people that are claimed to be only Chinese and therefore the origins are there, but actually we're coming from someplace else like this? So what I'm trying to suggest here is that genes, not blue jeans, genes, the G genes, as we know, do not have boundaries and borders. They go around. Most of us have some remnant of the most popular, widely distributed gene attributed to Brad Pitt. No, who? Genghis Khan. So this is the most widely distributed. So it's like, wait a minute. You ever see that show on TV where they do something roots and you examine where you came from and go, oh my God, really? I'm all white, I'm a racist, but there's a black grandma or great grandma in my history here. Anyhow, I don't want to digress too much. But anyway, Nagasena goes and has this conversation with the Greek king Menander. The Greek king Menander was not Hindu, but still had a notion of a autonomous monad self out of the Greek. Even though it might have been split between body and soul, there was still that self. Those of you who know Plato's teaching will know that there's a body-mind split. The soul is what is cultivated. The body's kind of a hindrance for the philosopher, but the soul goes on. So Nagasena was asking about the teaching of not self, an Atman or anatta. And Nagasena used this idea, using worldly custom to falsely refer. And he said, we use the name self to designate a temporary arrangement of elements, not a permanent individual. And then to give an example to Nagasena, what did he use? Anybody know? See, I think I said it before. But that's okay, because every time you come in, you cleanse your mind, all memory is gone, and we start tabla rasa. A river? No, that was, who was the river guy? Heraclitus. Right? No, he's a chariot, which would have been a very common instrument in Greece. And he says, we give a chariot to the name of for the sake of convenience, to a loose combination of various parts: wheels, axles, harness, leather or wood. All of these things are the components, and we kind of put them together and we call it a chariot. But he said neither chariot nor, and this is where he got kind of in the face, you can see sometimes why Buddhist monks got persecuted. He says neither the chariot or Nagasena, the king, but he didn't. He meant himself. So he said neither the chariot nor me, very polite. And therefore he was received well. But the implication was you, king, too, are the same. Neither of those have any abiding essence that can be found. Each functions, but neither has a substantial existence that the name implies. So these are name only. Now the problem is with words and language is once we start to name it, somehow psychologically something happens and we reify. We take a thing and make it into a real entity when in fact it's just a named thing that we point to out of convenience. So the text goes on and says, this body is false. Now we're into the next lines. Observe this body. That's a shen, this body, jia an li, is falsely set up, established, without a place to which it belongs. By closely examining the body, one fathoms what, see, this is again, by closely observing, and by this he means through the training, through the precepting, concentration, and the literary type of project, through that kind of observing, that nothing about it can be held. Now, see, this is very interesting. It doesn't say there's nothing there. You see what I mean? But it's saying there's nothing that can be held. Nothing can be clung to or kept. When I was a child, many centuries ago, coming out of the Roman Catholic tradition, I don't know, anybody have that background here? One? You know, okay. We have a ceremony that you go to at the earliest age, as soon as you can walk and go up to and you come up to the altar. There was an altar here, and they have a little railing. So the railing was in front of the altar. We don't have any railings here. And then the priest would come, and you'd kneel here with your palms together, and the priest would go down the line, and he would have a bowl of ashes, and he'd dip his finger into the ashes, and then he'd make a cross on your head of dirty ashes. And when he did that, he would recite in Latin, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. So as a reminder of impermanence, don't look for this in the Bible because it's not in the Bible. It comes from what's called the Book of Common Prayer. And it's used at funerals too. He says, we commit this body to the ground, earth to earth, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. And that was called Ash Wednesday. I was a little too young to really get into that. I mean, I didn't mind the dirt because everybody else had the dirt on their forehead. And so then we would have contests, who can keep it longest? Can you go to bed at night and wake up in the morning and still have it there and come to school with your, you know? And then others would debate how long its magic before, if you wiped it off with the magic, whatever the magic was supposed to be, would wear off. None of us are really contemplating that we were permanent, what, at 8, 9 years old? No, we were immortal. But you can see in the various traditions, philosophically and literature, this recurring theme comes. And it comes with the idea not of a liberating insight, not the prajnaparamita you're discovering here, but as a bummer, as a real bummer. And we don't really want to hear it. For Shakespeare, for example, time is almost a villain. And time is associated with ruin, R-U-I-N. And so there's, like in a sonnet, one of his famous sonnets, he's contemplating time. And he calls time the fell hand, meaning like the axe coming down. When I observe the felled hand time, falling of time. And then he has this interesting line. He's at the end of his contemplation, he says, ruin has taught me thus to contemplate. Ruin, the decay of everything has taught me to contemplate. That time will come and take my love away. Now here he could have meant his actual love. Or he could have said, my love. That which I love, which is me. So it could have been other love, or it could be self-love. But you could just you don't translate it because it's in English, but you could say, time, ruin has taught me thus to remain, the time will come and take all that I love away. And then he has this very interesting line that follows it. Like, clearly there's nothing substantial, nothing lasting, but we pretend. And Shakespeare, not the Buddha, is poking at this now. I don't know how many of you read the sonnets, but they're really interesting. Anybody here read Shakespeare's sonnets? A few heads nodding. Check them out. Check them out. We had to memorize them in elementary or secondary school. But But time pulls off the covers of this pretend. That's what Shakespeare's doing. It's like the great revealer. And then he has this idea that he ends with, this thought. What thought? That time will come and take all I love away. This thought is as a death, which cannot choose but to weep. So this thought that everything will pass, will be taken away by time, is like a paralysis, like a death, and which cannot choose. It's almost like I have to weep when I think about it. Choose to weep, but to weep, to have that which it fears. So this thought is a death which cannot choose but to weep. That which it fears will be lost. To me, this is like psychologically pointing to the whole nature of craving and grasping. It's an anxiety that's underneath this. And what he's saying, this thought is as a death which cannot, but weep to have, weep to grab, weep to take, have, that which it fears to lose. So in the very taking of it, we have a kind of subtle realization that we can't hold on to it and whatnot. So there's this poignancy, I don't know how to describe it, between getting what you want and at the same time knowing in the back of your mind somewhere that it can't be held. Anyhow, so this is different. The closely examining, talking about here, is a kind of clear wisdom. It's like a penetrating light. It's not what Shakespeare's talking about, which is a kind of ego-blurring, counterintuitive, but more the observing that's going on here is actually habit challenging. It's breaking our molds of the condition and constructing of what's called forms or forming, a translation of samskara. So the fourth skandha, the fourth mind-body kind of setup that we refer to, here's the Buddhist chariot, is form, feelings, thoughts, cognitions, samskara, and consciousness itself. The mind-body, wood, leather, wheels and whatnot that we call, is rendered that way. But the fourth one is these deep habituations, tendencies that are almost unconscious, closer to what maybe Freud or Jung were talking about as the unconscious working. And these are habitual patterns or tendencies, and that's why the texts say it's so hard to beat this thing, because this formation and clinging to the I in this way is deeply rooted. And the texts say it doesn't just happen in one lifetime, it happens in many lifetimes. So we're almost like tending towards that. One scholar I was reading called it a form of anti-realism, which I thought was I hadn't heard that term before. Anti-realism means a setting up of a, quote, reality that is actually not reality. And not only is it not that, but it's a negative take on reality. It's a resisting and saying a denial of reality. It's very interesting. So how many of our thoughts or philosophies are anti-realistic, anti-realism? Comforted as they might be, pleasing as they might be for a while, what the text is saying is be careful, because they may be comforting and pleasing, but in the end, they will leave you cold, because this too will pass. And so it's sort of like saying, get real right at the beginning. So therefore, it says, skillfully observe the body in the next verse, clearly viewing each part. So then it says, take it apart. You have the earth element. So the standard early Asian way of doing this was to take the four elements. Earth being the tissue, the flesh, the bones. Then what? The tuxedo. No. What comes after the earth element? Okay, fire, which would be what? No particular order. Earth and fire. Fire is what? Body heat, temperature. If we don't have fire, we be gone, right? Where I grew up in Wisconsin, you have a nice fire in the house, fire with your oatmeal breakfast, and then you go out, it's minus 30 degrees. Whew, you really realize how precious fire is at that moment. But too much fire, then you have fever. So there's earth, there's fire, what else? water. Great deal of the body is made up of the various fluids, blood, mucus, and so forth, and then air, which is the respiratory. So you take those four elements, they come together, and with a certain amount of careful taking care of them, they hold together, and we call it a me, a mind, and a body, and so forth. But in fact, it's a vibrating kind of ongoing process rather than a thing. So it says, look at each part, realize that all dharmas, all phenomena are empty illusions, and you will not give rise to, now they say mental distinctions, but what this means is false discriminations, a kind of parsing of things that is not actually in accord with true. There's an interesting how this is used. This becomes one of the major meditative, contemplative practices of monks and nuns. It doesn't mean it's limited. I mean, anybody can and probably should be doing something like this to take stock of what we call real. But in the practices of the monks and nuns, especially as they advance in their practices, they really get into contemplating the body as one of the first levels of breaking through to things as they really are, and then getting a sense of how much attachment is concerned with the trying to keep that illusory thing together. So one of the reasons why they may shave their heads and dispense with the clothes that are worldly clothes and reduce their material possessions and so forth is to get at the core of the self, which is the physical body, and not have it propped up by all these things that actually make it seem more real than it actually is, including house, because house or big-time house or mansion or whatever we call it is an extension of our concept of the body. And so by not dwelling in a house, they, quote, leave home. They also, if they're following these Dhatanga practices, they wander. The early monks and nuns wandered, and sometimes wandered so much they wouldn't stay under the same tree for 3 nights in a row lest they get attached to the tree. So strong was this impulse that they were wrestling with. So these practices are not meant as bitter mortifications of the flesh, the Dhatanga practices, but rather opportunities to observe the setting up and the letting go of these attachments. And it's a very contemplative state they use. Anyhow, one of the nuns in the early tradition, her name was Bajira, was in her deep meditation, but Mara tempts. So Mara is considered the veil of illusion and also considered to be a deity of malevolence who obstructs the awakening. When Buddha was under the tree meditating, Mara came and either used a lust or fear to try to shake him, and he stayed unmoved by Mara's temptations. Anyhow, so Mara came to try to frighten her out of her meditation. And the way she dealt with Mara was she used a verse, which is very close, if you'll see this. She used a thought, she said, this heap of sheer formations, all these various parts, there's no being to be found. Moreover, Mara is also that, and there's nothing there to be found. And so she emptied out Mara, and she emptied out herself, and here's the verse she used. Just as with an assemblage of parts, the word chariot is used. So she knew this earlier text. So when the aggregates, the 5 skandhas, form, feelings, and so forth, exist, there is a convention of a being, but not the real thing. So, and then, okay. So then the question comes, the next verse, and we're looking. Xiu Ming yin shui qi, fu yin shui tui mi, you ru xuan ho lun, chu ho bu ke zhi. Who causes this life to arise and what causes it to decline and demise? Like a whirling wheel of fire, its beginning and end cannot be known. So here comes, he says, you observe this and yet you try to say, where does it come from and what causes it to decline? It's really hard to get at that. Really hard to get at that. You know, it's so much of modern science right now, at least in the biological sort of genetic areas, are devoted to answering this question. What causes it to arise? What causes it to decline and demise? With the hope of making that wheel of fire into an eternal flame. In other words, to beat mortality. And so the question is, and it's the last verse, one of the last verses says, conventional learning is not going to get at this, but let's leave that till next week. Right now it's asking, the question then arises for someone who's contemplating this way, well, where does it come from? What causes it to grow old and weak and decline? Believe me, I'm into that contemplation now. At 9, when I got the ashes, it was like, what's with this guy, you know? I'm going to go out and play and live forever. Now, you know, I'm almost 80, and it's like, oh, decline and demise. That's interesting now. That's it's on my agenda every morning. Where is it? It's stuck on my mirror. But there's no stickum there. There's no postum there. It's just me looking at me in the mirror. It's like, oh, who's this? Why are you? Because I don't feel it all the time, but then I look at the mirror and go, oh my God, what happened to you? And especially on my piano, I have a picture of me when I was like 7 or 8. So I look at that and I say, that's me, that's me. And then I go to the mirror and wait, that's me. Whoa, what happened? What happened to that demise and decline? And it says like a whirling wind of fire. If you've ever watched fire in a fireplace when it starts to go, you can't find the beginning or end, the head or tail of it. And it's saying it cannot be known. So it's very interesting that Hanshan De Ching, said this was the one deep thing he pondered for his entire life. When he was young, he came home and his uncle was laid out dead in the parlor. He was a little boy, and he said, "What's with Uncle? Is he asleep?" And his auntie teased him and said, "Oh, he's just asleep. Go wake him up." Well, he was dead. Now, auntie, you know, child services might have got in touch with her, but anyhow. So he's going shaking and shouting, and then finally his mother says, "Stop it, silly boy, he's dead." And he said, "Dead? What does dead mean? He's not with us anymore." And so Hanshan said, "Well, where did he go?" And nobody had an answer. And then he thought, is this going to happen to me too? And he said, well, where did I come from then, if this is where I go? And his mother said, oh, don't be silly, you came out of your mother's belly. And then he had the question, he says, well, that's weird, but how did I get in there? And this, I mean, a childlike contemplation set him on a road of cultivation. So this is not necessarily, he read a metaphysical text. He observed life as it is, closely observed. If you observe closely your body, the world around you, the leaves falling off the trees now that once were green and budding in spring, you start to get a sense of what it means to observe closely this continuous thing. Anyways, I will this is kind of a side note, and I don't know why I threw it in today, but I had some very dear Hindu friends who sent me text messages. I just started doing that, text message. I thought email was the pinnacle. Well, email's not the pinnacle, so now I'm doing text messages. And people look at me like I was somewhere having coffee, and people were younger people my age, were sitting at the table across from each other. Everybody was texting, but they weren't texting each other, I assume. But maybe they were, I don't know. But they were doing this. And some of them were, and I'm going, and I can only do one, I don't know how you do that. So please don't send me long texts, just say, how are you? Good? Send. Bad? Send. Anyhow, I got these text messages with all these happy, light. And I said, they said Happy Diwali, D-I-W-A-L-I. And this is a Hindu festival, it's a festival of light. right? Brilliant light. And it comes at this time of the year where you have the transition from going into the darker period of the solstice that we're entering now. And so it's meant to celebrate and bring forth light. So I was thinking, yeah, and I sent back some wish, you know. My wish was, what a great festival. We need it now more than ever. The world is filled with all kinds of darkness, so let's let the light shine. Here comes the sun. And then I heard the news today. So where they celebrated this in New Delhi, it was so covered in darkness and smog and particle in the air that they couldn't even see the sun. And the reason? Because to celebrate light, they set off massive amounts of fireworks. And the fireworks put this particulate matter, levels of particulate matter, dangerous, what they call microparticles known as PM 2.5, pollutants that enter the bloodstream through the lungs and kill you. They literally reduce your access to the light. And they increased more than 23 times the World Health Organization recommended daily maximum exposure. So I just found this like really ironic. On one hand, you want to celebrate, right, the light, and then you do it with things that bring about the darkness. And I just wonder, sometimes this is called mixed karma. It's good intention on one hand and not so clear on the other, and it ends up with these mixed results. So I'm just throwing that in as a, not anything related to the text per se, but the text is coming up with things on karma, but it's almost like I was thinking maybe if everybody in New Delhi had turned off their phones, that might have been some light. In other words, and hadn't burned the fireworks, they might actually be able to see the natural light. Anyhow, one last thing I'll bring up, and then I will let you all run away tonight. This is sort of my Buddhist editorial, so you can tune it out if you want. I was struck this week when I read an article that there's been a dramatic increase of incidents across the country over the past year with an explosion of shootings and killings attributed to rage on the road, what we know as road rage. And I was reading the story of the counselor who counsels people who are arrested for road rage related incidents and have to go to this sort of counseling session. And he said in his 26 years of doing this, he's never seen anything like this. He said it's underway in an increasingly angry country. And he said the cases that he's getting are a measure of the country's stress, trauma, and polarization. And then when they talked to someone, this one really struck me as this young woman who had really been busted. She was going 110 in a 55 zone. And he asked her why. She said, I don't know. She said, I'm just so stressed out and angry. And then there's her quote. She says, constant TV, constant news, constant TV, constant news. She repeated it. And she said, it's like, hey, I'm using her quote. It's like, hey, look at this, look at this, look at that. Should we look at this? Should I look at that? And she's just feeling overly bombarded by the stimuli. And she says, people are just losing it. People are just losing it. They're so overstimulated, and the content of what they're getting is filled with rage, filled with hostility, filled with antipathy. And she said, humans are just too overwhelmed with just everything. And then she does this very interesting line. She said she found herself on social media more and more, feeling a dark hole of hopelessness, that's her words, at what she was seeing on social media. And she said another night, it was videos of influencers. What are influencers? Huh?
They're like personalities, like online personalities that like want to like sell you an idea or like a concept.
Personalities that want to sell you an idea.
Yeah, or like a concept. But generally they're just trying to like win followers, but they're just pushing out like an ideology or like an idea.
marketing crap online.
That's the better.
It's a colloquial. You have an idea back there? You follow influencers. They a little louder. Ah. Okay, no, I kind of get, I'm piecing it together now. What I hear is they're trying to sell you a better image of yourself by imitating them, which is built on an incredible sense of lack and insecurity, but besides that. But they're doing it so you will make them feel important.
They're just trying to, yeah.
Did they make money from this? Oh my, okay. The most noble of all motivations. Here we go. Okay, so she was saying, another night I was watching videos of influencers sitting on the beach, traveling to places she had never been, in a competition of who's doing better, who has this, who has that, who's making more money, who's right, who's wrong. And she said it became overwhelming when it all built up, plus the hatred of all these groups that was being, she just hit the cast and just went like that and almost killed somebody. This guy says when they do that, they get in conflicts and they start shooting each other on the highway with knives or guns or rocks or bottles of water or metal bars. I said he even had a case where somebody did a spear. Yeah. So when I heard this, for some reason, this Jataka tale came to my mind, and I just want to share with you. I guess you could say be wary of your influencers. So this is the Mahila Mukha Jataka, number 26, and I'll just read it. Everybody know what the Jatakas are? This is a division of the canon that deals with the Buddha's past lives when he was in many manifestations, a child, a beggar, a king, a prince, an animal even, and so forth. So it says, once upon a time when Brahmadatta was reigning in Benares, the Bodhisattva became his minister. In those days, the king had a state elephant named Damsel Face. I don't know why it's like, pretty face, okay, Damsel Face, who was virtuous and good and never hurt anybody. This was the elephant. Now, one day, some burglars came close to the elephant's stall by night and sat down to discuss their plans using these words. This is a way to tunnel into the house. This is a way to break through the walls. Before we carry off the plunder, the tunnel or breach the walls ought to be made as clear and open as a road for us so we don't get caught. In lifting the goods, you shouldn't hesitate to murder. For then there will be no one to resist you, and there will be no witnesses. So they talked about this every night. And then it's a burglar, a real thief, should get rid of all goodness and virtue and be quite merciless as a man of cruelty and violence. Should be known that way. So this is how they talked. They pumped each other up with killing and hurting and deception and so forth. And after having schooled one another in these advices they were giving each other, they came back the next day and the next day. So every night they would gather there outside the elephant's stall. And for many other days besides, and they held this together till the elephant came to the conclusion that they were expressly instructing him. And that he must become pitiless, cruel, and violent. And such indeed he became. No sooner did his mahout, do you know what a mahout? Mahout? What's a mahout? It's the caretaker trainer of the elephant. They have a very close relationship, almost like a parent and child. The mahout came in the early morning. The elephant took the man in his trunk and dashed him to death on the ground. And in the same way, he treated a second and a third, and every person who in turn came near him. The news was brought to the king that Damsel Face had gone off the deep end and was killing everybody he caught sight of. So the king sent the bodhisattva saying, go sage and find out what has twisted his mind this way. Away went the bodhisattva and soon satisfied himself the elephant showed no signs of physical ailment. And as he thought over the possible causes of the change, he came to the conclusion that the elephant must have heard persons talking near him and imagined they were giving him a lesson, and this is what twisted his mind. Accordingly, he asked the elephant keepers whether any persons had been talking together recently near the stall by night. And they said, yes, Lord, some burglars came and talked. Then the bodhisattva went and told the king, saying, there's nothing wrong, sire, with the elephant physically. He's just been perverted by overhearing these vicious bandits talk. And the king says, well, what is to be done now? And the sage said, order good men and sages, good women, to sit in the stall and talk only of goodness. You could say, read really cool stories, read children's stories to the big elephant. Once upon a time there was, think of all those wonderful child stories. Anyhow, and he said, okay, let's do it. Then the bodhisattva found these good men and women, these sages and brahmins, in the stall and bid them to talk of goodness, and they began talking with their seats close to the elephant, not too close, because he still wasn't tamed, and spoke as follows. Don't mistreat or kill anyone. Be patient. The good are patient and loving and merciful and so forth. And hearing this, the elephant thought they must mean this as a lesson for him, once again. And he resolved thenceforth to be good, and so he became and went on and never. And the king said to the bodhisattva, well, my friend, is he good now? He says, yes, your majesty. Said the bodhisattva, thanks to the wise and good people that the elephant was so twisted were removed and he became himself. And then he had this last line, which I think is very interesting. There the verses, through hearing first the burglar's wicked talk, damsel ranged around abroad, wounding and killing. Through hearing later wise people's lofty words, the noble elephant turned to good once more. And then the line was, it was told about one of the Buddha's disciples. There's always a parallel. So when the Buddha says, oh, at that time, the elephant then is my disciple now. And of course, the king was Ananda, and the bodhisattva was the Buddha in a previous life. And so then he said, just like the elephant then, this disciple now, nature is to be easily led astray. And that's the line, that to be easily led astray. And I was thinking about these road rage incidents where she was reporting this. She was easily led astray by listening to so much of this. And if you just sort of pay attention now what's in the air, it's actually unbelievable, the amount, not just the amount and the quantity, but the quality of the discourse is like, I'm sorry, it's like these burglars and bandits, just bad-mouthing, full of hatred, animosity, racism, whatever you say. It's everywhere in the air. And as we get closer to this election, unfortunately, this is starting to peak. And you're starting to see more and more people, quote, lose it in incidents of rage or whatnot. And so the reason I bring this up is to just say, be careful to guard your faculties and not be led astray. Be careful what you listen to, because it's like a kind of food. And even if we think we're pretty strong, the ambient atmosphere of this starts to wear, even on the strongest of people, and you start to get an edge, an anxiety, a shortness, a kind of intolerance that can quickly spill over. Now, the other part of this, which is bad, and I will say this, I don't know about influencers, but I do know generally about the digital social media. The programs that are put together by the best and brightest people in psychology who know how to make these things irresistible. And if you want to read a very good book, the book is called Irresistible, which is discussing how the corporate technical marketing and putting together of these games, of these apps, of these, quote, communication things are designed in such a way as almost like candy. They're irresistible. And this is why you're finding more and more people trying to pull back on the influence these have on kids. You know, if you think about the idea to take cell phones out of the learning school process, this movement that's afoot now, it's very interesting because it's basically imitating this. It's saying, don't let the elephants listen to this. Let them not be led astray. The other thing I'll just say on a closing note, people who design this stuff also know how lethal and irresistible it is. So often it's the case, say in Silicon Valley, that the people that are most central to the designing and making of this thing are making incredible amounts of money, do not send their children to schools where these devices are being used. So on one hand, they're making their money selling them. I'm sorry, I don't mean to get upset, but it does bother me. They're making their money creating these things and selling them to schools. It's absolutely essential to a child's education. At the same time, they won't send their children to the schools where these are prevalent. They send them to schools where the devices aren't allowed. So that tells you a great deal. Anyhow, that was my editorial. Sorry I went on, but the road rage thing, because I see it. I travel back and forth through Kaya all the time, and I'm seeing it increase and increase and increase. And it's sort of in the air, so I shared the Jataka with you tonight on that. I promise I won't editorialize very much, but every once in a while, it gets the best of me. Okay, any questions, comments, observations? Nothing? Yes?
Marty, I just wanted to ask you if you can talk a little bit more about literary wisdom, and how's that different than true wisdom?
How it's different than true. I didn't say true.
No, you didn't say true. Okay.
There's literary, contemplative, and then what's called real mark, which is not mediated by anything, it's direct. They're all true. But there's different degrees of realization. When it's literary, it is coming from another source, and you study it, and you examine it, and use analysis and logic and consistency, and you see, does this match? Does this make sense? And even if it doesn't, quote, make sense, does it not lead me astray? And if it doesn't make sense initially, you ask the question, what would I need to get under my belt to be able to understand it, rather than saying, I don't understand it, therefore it's nonsense. Contemplative is different. You put the books down. The Chinese expression, after you read 1,000 books, walk 1,000 miles. And so you put the books down and you start to look into your own being, your own mind and heart, to find a kind of wisdom or insight that comes from stilling the mad mind and the emotions and the attachments and so forth. And it's sort of like a toggle switch. People experience this when they're in the meditation retreat and they're sitting. Things are pretty cool. It's pretty clear. You get really calm. You start to see things. You have insights and whatnot. And of course, 5 seconds off the pillow and suddenly it's gone again. Or the 7-day retreat ends and you go back out and all of that contemplative wisdom just vanishes or thins. The real mark, the last one, is something that doesn't go anymore. It's developed, it's intrinsic, it's your basically second nature to you now. And it's so a part of you that you can't even have a thought that you would drop that or see things differently. It's so palpably visible, immediate. So those, I don't know if that answers your question. They're all true. They're not false. But ultimately, you want to get to the point where it's your first thought, your first reaction, your first ground of awareness that doesn't rely on having to contemplate it. It's like, oh my God, something happened. I need to go sit and figure it out. I just lost my temper. I just heard this influencer and I don't know what to do. I'm going to go sit. Or I'm going to go back and read the text. And it says, well, if an influencer tells you to do this, you shouldn't do it. You say, okay, relax. But the last one is you don't even have to have that other reference. You become your own accomplished and reliable, trustworthy reference. This is called, you manifest a body that speaks the Dharma. It's an actual embodied state. And it's considered to be the highest and the most reliable. And it doesn't come and go at death either. So it carries over. Good question. So-so answer, but okay, anybody else? Don't get mad on the road. Don't get mad on the home. Okay. We'll continue next week, same time, and we'll do the transference in English. May every living being our minds as one and radiant with light, share the fruits of peace with hearts of goodness, luminous and bright. If people hear and see how hands and hearts can bind in giving unity, may our minds awake to great compassion, wisdom, and to joy. May kindness find reward. May all who sorrow leave their grief and pain. May this boundless light dispel the darkness of our endless night. Because our hearts are one, this world of pain turns into paradise. May all become compassionate and wise. May all become compassionate and wise. Bow in respect to the triple jewel.